each of us to talk a little bit about what your company does and who your target customer is so we better understand who you are and relative to who you think you are. So Gary, I'll start with you.
Yeah, super, thanks. By the way, I live here in New Orleans, so welcome all of you to New Orleans. Glad you're here. Our company focuses on live events, mostly in the sports and entertainment space, a little bit of corporate, but we also work on the museum side of the business as an integrator and as a fabricator.
And Steve Halling with AVEC up in Boston. And we do a few different things. I mean, so we're doing corporate event work, staging, rental, that type of thing. We're also engaged with a pretty healthy trade show business, which I don't see a whole lot of at this event, but we do quite a lot of work in trade show business. And then we also do some integration work as well. And I think one of the questions was about our target customer, though,
right.
which is, those are markets, really, in my opinion. I mean, we tend to go for relationships with corporate event managers, communication managers, and trade show managers directly on the corporate level. You know, less so. We still do quite a bit with creative houses, exhibit houses, that type of thing, but we tend to go more for the corporate relationships.
All right. Don?
And I'm Don Gazakis, HB Live. We're based in Connecticut. Our target market is mostly corporate events. We do a lot of what I'll call niche corporate business meetings, nothing really extravagant. And we service primarily the Northeast, so we look for our clients in that corporate space to have some sort of a headquarters or a large presence in the Northeast.
Okay. So Don, I'm going to come right back to you and ask the big question that we all have here today is, what are you seeing develop now in your market, in your industry, that will affect your business 5 years from now?
We had a call on this earlier.
And you can't change your answer from that call. No, I'm just kidding.
Damn. So I have been thinking a lot about that, and then just in the last 24 hours, I've had a number of conversations with people, and it's apparent that everybody has a very unique perspective on this, and they're locked into that perspective. It doesn't sound like they can be convinced otherwise. So it's really interesting to hear those perspectives. For us, what we're seeing is the shift from off-site events to move back into on-site events. And we're seeing a lot of our clients that are moving into new facilities, and they're building out what I'll call performance meeting spaces, where it's a fully equipped AV experience, but it's built for the audience experience. Mm-hmm. So it's a very robust and warm and friendly place, and the AV is just sort of integrated and disappeared in the background. And the big shift that we're seeing that affects us is they're no longer renting, they're no longer taking us off-site, and they're calling just for our most experienced technical crews.
Right, so does this look like, for those of us who don't live in the Northeast, where I think this is probably more prevalent, where there are corporate campuses, mm-hmm. and they're keeping a lot of their meetings on campus, bringing people in from around the country and around the world to meet there, but they only want you to come in and fix their problems.
Well, they're actually just looking for us to operate their system.
Just simply operate the system. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Okay.
And so this is something that you think that's going to affect how you might be doing business in 5 years.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep. Interesting. We're going to come back to some of these things because some of this ties in with what Sean was talking about just a few minutes ago, and all of this is starting to make a little sense. So moving over to you, Steve, what are you seeing that's now that you know that you're going to have to deal with 5 years from now?
Well, I will start with, of course, just because it's a panel discussion, I'm seeing the opposite in our business. So we're seeing fewer shows happening, originating on our corporate clients' campuses, and more so out and about. But that's kind of a side note. Probably three things I just want to touch on. I mean, and I'm going to talk about the negatives first, and then kind of the opportunity side. But I mean, labor. I think number one is we keep looking at labor, and we all keep struggling with how do we keep up and still get qualified people on our show sites and engaged in our business that don't cost us an arm and a leg. I mean, I've had most of like my PowerPoint graphics operators go from about $250 a day to some up to $800 a day just in the last probably 14, 16 months. So labor is a huge concern that we have to deal with in some way, and we're working on strategies around that. Transportation, we operate both a local kind of Boston area business, but we also, 70% of our revenue is national. transportation is going to become a big issue because as we run into problems with, emissions, with, price of fuel, all of those types of things, we have to be thinking about strategies to, have equipment, have personnel in the right places around the country where we most frequently serve. So we're looking at that right now as well. And those are kind of the downsides in many ways, in my opinion. The upside that we have to, I think, keep focused on is, the din of marketing that goes out to all of our clients. And we have to keep thinking about ways, and for 5 years from now, honestly, we can sit and say, well, maybe it's through mobile marketing or who knows what, but we have to be thinking about how we keep our clients' attention in all of this, because there's other companies. I mean, we just saw, right, a lot of production companies that are doing AV services. Well, they're competing for the same attention that we are. So we have to keep thinking about how do we keep those clients' attention and keep them coming to us instead of everybody else.
Right, so I'll come back in a minute because I want to talk about the polarity of your observations about the future. And I think it has a lot to do with who the customers are and how that's evolved, which I think will be interesting. Gary, what are you seeing? Because you're in a very different environment than these folks are in.
Yeah. So what I see, because we wear the hat of working in the exhibit and environment side of the world as well as the live event, I find that the advances that are made in immersive exhibits, for example, or immersive environments, our live event clients want more of that kind of experience where customers and their attendees are truly a part of the journey and a part of the experience, where that Instagrammable moment is like no longer enough. Mm-hmm. And so what I see is how we struggle to do, I think, as an industry, is how we provide for those experiences that we see in the immersive environments of exhibits and theme parks and beyond to happen in the temporary basis of live events, mm-hmm. and to be affordable. And so what I am challenged with, I think, as a company, is how we become those really the technical translators for our mm-hmm. clients who have mm-hmm. a vision. And we're supposed to help augment that, yet at the same time reconcile that the theatrical tools we have of the past are no longer quite enough.
Right.
Right.
Good. So this kind of brings us into the whole question of, if this is what you're seeing, if this is the trajectory that you're seeing from your position, something's got to change in your business, and I'm suspecting it has a lot to do, because you talked about customers, and you talked about customers, is how we approach customers. So specifically, Gary, how is this going to affect your sales organization selling into, well, should we say this is the experience marketing that we talked about this morning?
So I'd say that the buyer is someone that looks a lot more like myself mm-hmm. in terms of age mm-hmm. than they ever have been in the past from what I've seen. And therefore, from a Salesforce perspective, it is more important, I think, for us to put those in the seats of a sales organization that are not necessarily the technical experts, but that are experts at orchestrating resources inside the company mm-hmm. to bring the right expertise or subject matter expertise to the customers. And so what I mean by that is, someone who's grown up through a technical experience is probably not the right kind of Salesforce member for the future of what we're trying to do.
So what I'm hearing you say is that your future salespeople are going to look more like your clients, and then less like
ourselves.
Us.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Good. Interesting. Same question, Steve. How does your changing horizon affect who you're going to put in front of the customer?
Well, interesting. I'm going to more in line with what you're seeing, I think, and to the point that we just hired. I mean, I kind of feel like I should knock on wood for this. Our first ever salesperson this year, but it was because what we were seeing is technically our technical producers were the ones that were our client-facing people within the company, and they were having a harder time because they are more that technical background. They were having a harder time with some of the conversations that the clients wanted to engage them in. So I intentionally went out and hired, somebody who ended up being, female with good head on her shoulders, good sales practices, but I intentionally chose somebody with absolutely no experience in our industry. Because what I wanted that person to do was be able to go to our events, see what we do, then go back to our customers or prospects and do the same kind of, go back and talk about the same awe and wonder that we want our customers to talk about. They could, have that same kind of like, oh my God, you can't believe what they did this thing downtown last week. It was great. But it's helping her to assimilate more with what those clients are looking for from us, And what we found is we've been getting a good reaction from them. That is somebody that, that we don't need, yet another person to talk tech. We need somebody to talk human talk and things that, people actually can relate to. And by pulling somebody from out of the industry, that particular tactic worked for me.
So how are you going to generate a line item quote if those are the only kinds of conversations you're having?
Well, we have variable quotes. I don't remember if you saw our system or if you remember our system, but we literally have the ability to choose, once we do an estimate, to choose 5 different ways of outputting our estimates, everything from the most basic summary to kind of middle ground summaries to like fine detail for like TDs and those kinds of clients.
Right. So thank you. For Don, so I'm a little concerned because you described a world with where what you do is going away. And so how are we going to, how are you going to sell into a completely changing customer dynamic?
Well, so let's talk about the person that we're putting in front of the client first. And I can't create dissension here because I agree with both of you. The person that's got to be in front of the client has to build that trust. And I'll kind of paraphrase the presentation this morning. As far as the translation goes, we're all speaking English. It's just about perspective. So the initial opening question was about a trend that I see building towards the future, and that's just one thing moving in the market overall. So not sure where to go from here with that comment.
Well, so for the part of your market that the customer is taking things back in-house and using you for transactional services, how would you approach that market now? What would you do differently, or do you leave it altogether?
Well, and that's the challenge is we have to decide, are we going to chase that market or not? Do we want to be in that services game with the hopes? So many of us in the room have been through this for a number of years, and we've seen the cycles. So if I go back to my early days, there were, Hartford is the insurance capital of the world, and all the insurance companies were building TV studios where they would produce all of their content. And then they all decided, well, we don't want to keep up the TV studios or staff them, so we outsourced everything. And then they said, well, that's getting too expensive, so we're going to insource it. And they build another studio. And they go through these cycles. And the same thing's happening with, we're going to on-site our events, we're going to off-site our events, we're going to do them remotely, we're going to leverage Zoom or other unified communications. So, we're seeing the cycle. What I think is happening is there's more cycles happening in a shorter period of time, and they're overlapping. And we're going to need to figure out of all the noise, what's the most important one to listen to?
All right, so I'm going to go off our previous discussions here, and then if you guys have some questions, I'm going to look out at you here in just a second. But I'm kind of interested about this issue of, do we, in this experience, this customer experience mentality, do we adapt what we do to meet customer demand, or do we redirect what we provide to customers who are still buying what we're selling? In other words, do we stick with the customer even though they've gone a different direction and adapt? Or do we stick with what we're good at and find the people who are actually buying it? Gary?
It's a great question. I think it's a question about where you are as a business. Where I am as a business, I want to be, I'm in a position where I want to be building an organization that's anticipating customer needs. I think the AV industries and those of us in live events have always been the kind of translators of big idea into reality. I think it's about being more in tune with what the next big ideas are and being sure that our role in the AV industry is to become the experts into things like AI and AR and VR and IoT and all these things that are kind of on the periphery of live events at the moment, but becoming more a part of the lexicon and the toolkit that we need to be able to service. So I'd suggest that for us, it's more of the former, which is I want to know where our customer demands are going to be in the future. And I want to be prepared to anticipate those, not to just stay segmented in the ones that we've done the last decade.
Steve, what's your reaction to that question?
Well, it's going to be a solid, it depends.
You took my answer.
Yeah. Damn it. I read your notes. Because it's going to depend on the client. Because I could probably identify top of mind, like probably 30% of my clients that they don't want to see any change. And why would I introduce change in an environment where change creates anxiety and so on? So we'll deal with those 30% that expect us to work kind of as that technical and services related company consistently and make sure that they're happy with it. For the remainder, which is the majority by far, I think more than 70% again of our clients, we will help to try and lead them down the path. I mean, we will look at what they need to be doing, and we'll be perfectly transparent about it and say, well, these are some services we think you'd be interested in, or a technology, or a method for doing your event, and introduce them to another vendor if we have to. But certainly, going back to the 5-year plan, we're absolutely going to be looking at what services we offer to see which ones we should be investing in and owning personally.
Don?
Good luck now.
Yeah, I
Good
know.
luck.
Yeah, you took my, it depends.
It depends, but
Yeah.
you have a better take on it.
I have a different take on it, which is for the things that we're currently doing and we're doing well and we're making good money at, being scalable and being able to present to a client that today's solution is perfectly adequate for their needs. And whether it's the technology, the experience, the budget, whatever it is, we've got that. And then have the ability to have a new conversation both with the existing clients and with the new clients to say, you don't have to settle for what we're doing today. We have other things that we can do that can develop your experience, can bring in new technologies, or take away technologies for a completely different experience.
And I'm sorry, Tom, if I could just add too, I mean, we have one new tactic we've been using in sales just this year, which we are now delivering unsolicited proposals to our clients, to our regular clients, saying, we know this is the way you've always been doing your programs, but we got an idea, and we go through a fairly extensive process to actually package up what you'd expect to see from a creative company, but it identifies a problem, and then we kind of walk them through, here's some ways that we think you could solve this problem before you actually even know you had the problem.
And I'll ask the question every once in a while, are these people that you've done business with before, or are you just kind of chasing
They're all
folk,
regular
you're trolling?
clients. No, these are regular clients
regular
that
clients.
we're looking for either for retention purposes or expanding services.
Awesome, that's fantastic. So while we have these guys up there, we have some very unique markets and who they're trying to serve. Any questions you want to ask these folks right now? Or I'll just keep on going. Yes.
I got one. It's for Dawn. So, in your it depends. With your first statement that you're seeing this, because I'm seeing now I'm from Toronto, so maybe I'm in the Northeast as well. So, I have all kinds of corporate headquarters that are internalizing everything, like millions and millions. There was a $50 million integration bid out there with CIBC, and wrapped into it was the $5 million a year live event spend that they did with Freeman every year for the last 20 years. But they just chucked it in and said, here, integrator, you figure it out. So they made that spend part of a different budget item. So I guess my question is, in your depends, for those that you think maybe the strategy is to chase the service model and help them with their internal work, how do you determine that to be the case? Or for those that you decide, you know what, I'm going to do my traditional model in the outside world, and I'm going to go and find more that do this thing I do. What would be the determining factor for that? Is there?
Yep.
That's a big question, but
That is a great question. So I have a similar challenge to you, which is I am a part of a larger organization which handles integration and managed services and some other things that are part of Sean's other numbers that he put up there. So so we have to decide which side of the fence those opportunities fall on. And in some cases, the bid for the integrated services is one for the integration, and then they're throwing in this managed service component. And we've got to decide, are we going to propose it in the traditional model where it's essentially a full-time resource or multiple full-time resources, and allow the integration business to service that with a staffing, or are they going to throw it to the other side of the fence and we approach it with a live events perspective, and in more of an ad hoc, and we're still figuring that out. So we don't have a good approach to that. The bottom line is we have to decide, can we provide what's best for the client while still contributing to the success of our organization? And if you look at what they want and we go, we don't have the required resources and can't do it in a successful manner and make money, then we need to turn and walk away. I hope that helped.
Good question. Another question.
Chip, did I answer your question too?
Well, I was just trying to clarify how Jamie knew that you had Depends.
This one, Mr. Solomon, thinking about creative services and how that market interacts with the sale of technology or even the meat and potatoes AV that we do you find that your ability to deliver creative services helps to sell on the equipment side, or is it vice versa? Which feeds the other most?
We are only selling creative services. We make our money on the delivery of the services on the back end. You know, the sales proposition we never have is about what the technical skills or capacity for execution are that we have. But that is what's generating a large part of the revenue after the differentiator, which is we're selling the big idea, and we happen to be able to self-perform all the stuff in the back of the shop, you know?
The rest of the panel, do you experience that, or do you sell creative as well?
So we do tend to sell mostly, again, a little bit client dependent, but we do tend to send mostly as kind of that selling the end experience to the client, and I don't want to use that word experience too much because it just is way overused.
It's meaning less and less every day.
It is. So we tend to talk more about, we'll deliver a rendering, we'll say this is what it's going to be like, we'll talk them through an agenda, here's some kind of cool stage effects that we think are a good idea, right? So we'll give them more of a picture of what they're buying into. But I will add too that within the last, it was about 16 months ago, I added a small media group to the company. So we're doing some application development, we're doing some video production work, but it's always tied to the technology. So technology leads, we do a proposal, and then we do oh, by the way, we just proposed this relatively complex stage design with all these crazy screens. We can help you with the media production if you want us to as well. And it's done very well. I mean, the group has grown from, last year's revenue. If I kind of averaged it out, I mean, we've probably seen about probably 150% growth over the last year, and it's becoming a nice add-on. And I mean, just to be clear, I mean, before we even did any of this, I went out and talked to our creative clients and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I don't want this to be a surprise. And by the way, what do you think about it? And 90% of them came back and said, actually, we applaud it. We would love to just give it to you, because guess what? A lot of those companies don't have internal capabilities anymore either. So they're happy to give us the revenue instead.
So with the time we have left, I want to touch on Sean's presentation and how AVEC is looking at the future and the data they're pulling in. So my table, we made some interesting side glances during that presentation. What was your initial feedback? What was a takeaway? What's an observation you want to make with that? I'll start with you, Don.
Yeah, so I actually took notes. So the biggest thing that popped out at me was the slide related to live events versus performance. And live events had the biggest number being rental and staging services. On the performance, there was no dollars for services. And I find that troubling that there's no record of revenue for all the services provided in those performance spaces.
Right, but as John said, they really started with the manufacturer sale, and our piece of it turned out to be that little $6 billion down in the corner, which is what most of us actually experience. So that, I mean, speaking of takeaways, it's like I was having trouble finding us in it. So what was your reaction?
Honestly, I had like a million questions, so we'll get back to those later. But the biggest single takeaway was around the services, because it seems like services is an opportunity. There's part of me, that little voice in my head that says, hey, hold on, because how many industries have we seen go down the path of, we do hardware, but now we do services. It is a money generating or revenue generating area. But I also look at services as, high cost of doing business. I mean, so having people on staff makes it kind of tough in terms of, from a business to manage revenue to costs. So I'd be very careful about it. But as I look at that, it more or less supports, like I just mentioned, my media group expansion. I mean, I plan to look at other services along those lines. And I know like webcasting was even mentioned on there too, in particular. We started investing in that about 3 years ago, and it's a huge part of our business now. Because guess what? Every webcast requires audio, video, lighting. So we find it's a nice drag along service that we provide now.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on that because the definition of services, I think, needs to be clearer
Right.
to us, because in the industry, if you look at rental and staging or event production, are you looking at all of our dollars, all of our revenue as a service, or is it broken up into different components of our business?
Yeah, and that's the right question. Hopefully they're looking at everything we do from a rental production standpoint as a service, because they already accounted for the equipment in the manufacturer number of the spend, as Janae pointed out. I want to change the question. I want to change the angle of the question a little bit for you, Gary, in that one of the things that jumped out on me in Sean's presentation was the influence, or some of us might think the undue influence, of the IT department on corporate spend, but that's probably not what you see in your world at all. So give us some hope about who's actually going to be buying from us.
Yeah, that was the part to me that was the most head scratcher of, like, that makes no sense to me because I've not experienced it at all. But maybe it's because of who the client types that we have, right? I think that Disney's not the only one that wants their own world at this point, right? I mean, I feel like every brand, every organization has this desire for a hyper-customized experience, whether that's permanent or temporary. And so for me, the customer type is not IT, in that it's happening at such a creative level. So that part definitely was a head scratcher to me, but I could get why it comes in.
I think why it comes in, and part of the distinction is really the definition of what a live event is. And I think a lot of the data was talking about internal corporate events, which none of us would consider a live event. It's just a meeting. And a live event is an audience as opposed to meeting participants. And I think that's a healthy distinction that we can grab on. And if you eliminate internal meetings, you've pretty much eliminated most of the influence of IT.
That's my business.
Right.
Tom, I would also just, sorry, but I would just add too, I mean, I've had a couple of clients tell us, oh, by the way, we want you to start talking to our IT department too about these events coming up. And frankly, I think the way it's been explained to me and my takeaway from it is, well, they're nerds too, so you guys know how to talk to each other.
Right.
And so the IT people, will listen to us. They'll kind of rank us on, does that seem like an actual dependable solution? And then they'll go back and talk to the same people we've been talking to for, in some cases 20 years. But somehow they interpret it differently than, I guess.
So it's the closest thing they have to a geek.
Yes,
so they're
exactly.
going to judge us on it. That's interesting.
And just one last thought on that. From our perspective, we work a lot with the IT or the AV or the facilities people, but they are working on behalf of the corporate communications or the meeting planners who are calling upon them to work with us to handle the technology. They handle the content, we handle the technology, and we need to figure out how to hop that line a little bit and get upstream, as apparently, well, that's your business, and you've managed to make that leap. Now we've got to be able to step over that line.
Right. All right. Well, thank you. Gary?
My last thought, I think, on it is, I don't believe that AV is just the future of experience design. I believe AV is the future of entertainment, right? And there was a portion of it's at the core of it. And there was a portion of that talked about the consumer feedback, and one of the things they ranked the least was around other entertainment options. But I would suggest that we have the opportunity to weave entertainment to make the distinction between just a meeting that's happening in a building and what an actual event is. It's really, that to me is the differentiator. And I think we have an opportunity as an industry to kind of ride this wave in a really tremendous way, because I think there's such a demand for it. And the more we can include entertainment into the focus, into the agenda, in a way that's unique, is, I think, just for us to take advantage of.
All right, that's a great closing comment. Closing comment, Steve?
I agree.
Well played. Yeah.
Really, it's going to be the one time I'm just going to say those two words.
Yeah. Don?
I have to agree.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all
I
in
read his
alignment.
notebook again.
Yeah, look at my notebook.
I've been on so many panels with Don, and I've never had Don agree with anything. This is fantastic. This is fantastic. So, folks, I thank you all for your time and attention. We're going to get back on our agenda. Thank you, panel, for your time in all of this and sharing your insights, and I hope to catch up with all of you at the bar. All right, thank you.